Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. We're going to be talking about foundational automation studio solutions today. I think we've got a fairly small to jump in the chat, talk through. I think what I'm most excited to talk about are things that can kind of be easy wins, quick wins, especially for either smaller orgs or maybe if you've got a smaller team. These solutions are really meant to be flexible. I'm not going to be giving you, exact code that you're going to be able to plug into your account right away. You'll still have to do some thinking to kind of figure out how this does or doesn't make sense for your organizations. But the goal of this is to kind of put things out there that are fairly easy to configure and to get set up. They provide a lot of value, and I think most importantly, they're well documented out in the community. There are some other people out there who I think have done a lot of work around some of the things we're going to talk about, and I think there are a lot of resources out there supporting these things. So it should be, really easy for folks to go out there and kind of tweak these to your use cases and get them going in your accounts pretty quickly to hopefully bring a little bit of value to you. So for our agenda today, we're going to talk about upcoming sessions just for a little bit. So today we've got our deep dive session. There is another one next week on the 4th around advanced import and export in Marketing Cloud. And then this is a joint meeting with the Boston Marketers Group. So we've got some hands-on sessions. So I know that we try to get every Monday, we try to get somebody access to Marketing Cloud so they can actually get hands-on building. So we're currently doing a series on email content, kind of aligning with that specialist exam. Not quite a boot camp, but kind of, lining up with the things that you'll need to know for that certification. So if you're interested and you want to get some hands-on experience in Marketing Cloud, please check us out. So for today's talk, there are a couple things that I'm going to be hopefully covering here. Data view logging. So data views are kind of those back-end Marketing Cloud system views. They've got a whole bunch of great information about the various activities going on in your Marketing Cloud account, but they're not kind of accessible in the UI. You've got to query them. So we're going to talk about some solutions to kind of expose them and make them a little bit easier to work with for folks who may not have the sharpest SQL skills. Sendlog. So this is something that I think some people out in Marketing Cloud world are going to be familiar with, but folks who are newer to the ecosystem may not be exposed to this if it's not in your account out of the box. So the Sendlog is going to be capturing information about sends at send time as they leave your account. And that's going to let you do some kind of cool things that aren't accessible within the data views. So we're going to talk about those a little bit, how they line up, and how you can kind of use that to your advantage to help you understand what's going on in troubleshooting cases. Bounces yesterday. This is one of my favorite. So you're going to have a bounce data view within your account that's going to track your bounce activity, which hopefully is low, minimal, right? We don't want our emails to be bouncing, but it does happen. And when it does, you've got to be able to kind of be aware of that and take action on it. So a big thing with bounces yesterday is kind of keeping a rolling data extension around your recent bounce activity. And that's going to let you kind of act as a smoke alarm. You'll be able to kind of see some problems, hopefully before they snowball into something larger and actually affect your account's deliverability. And then we've got something called Automation Squared. So I want to say recently, but I think it's been a little over a year at this point, Marketing Cloud released a data view about your Automation Studio instances itself. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that allows you to do and how you can kind of, again, get a little bit more reporting and some error handling around your automations. I know one thing that I can't stand is when I work on an automation, I pause it and then I forget to reschedule it. I know I'm not the only one out there who does that. This automation of your automations will kind of allow you to monitor that and make sure that you're aware of what's running, what's not running, and what's failing. And then at the end, we'll go over 5 tips, just kind of recap the things that we've talked about. And I'm also going to share a resources slide. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this information is documented out in the community. I'm definitely, standing on the shoulders of some other community members in this presentation. So I want to make sure that people have the information they need to kind of get out there and start digging into this for yourselves and figure out how this makes sense for your individual use cases, your individual programs. Okay, so we're going to jump right in and start out with data view logging. So your data views in your account, these are in the official documentation. You've got a lot of different ones out there. You can look at your different jobs coming out of Marketing Cloud, your sends, your opens, clicks, bounces, unsubscribes, complaints. Those are just, a handful of them. You've got a data view on your actual subscribers themselves. So you can kind of look at information about your recipients at that subscriber level, but they all offer different data points. So they are kind of similar in that you'll see the same data point in a lot of different data views, but you won't see everyone in all of them. So I know one community member that I really rely on for kind of understanding what the data views have available is Zuzana Jarsinko. So you can see down here, hopefully, at the very bottom of my slide here, I've got a link out to her data views. This is also available at dataviews.io, which again will be on that resources slide at the end of the presentation. But she's produced a data view map that kind of shows you all of the data views, how they relate, and most importantly, a primary key across them. So you can see how the different data views can expose information across multiple data views about the same subscriber or maybe the same email job. So that's really helpful in kind of narrowing down exactly what you're looking at. You want to be mindful of whether they are at the BU or enterprise level. So if you've got multiple business units, a lot of these data views will be focused within that BU. So you may have to add a ENT prefix to look at your subscribers, for example, across the entire enterprise. Your data view sizes, they're going to vary greatly across the type. So if you send a high volume of email, your send data view is going to balloon very quickly. You'll have a lot of records in there. They store, I believe, 6 months is the time frame that Salesforce gives. Something like your complaints data view, hopefully, if you've got a lower sender volume, you've got an even lower complaint volume. I've seen that kind of go beyond that 6-month time frame just because there aren't a lot of records in there. So it's really kind of not guaranteed. So what I'm going to be talking about is kind of logging that and why we should log that. There are some reasons not to log. Again, if you are a larger account with a very high sending volume, these data views are going to get very large very quickly, and that can impact the performance within your account. So you can kind of think about that, about, do I want to store this? Maybe I want to use an extract and send it to a data lake if I have that available to me. But for smaller organizations, you may not have those resources. And in that case, logging data views can be a useful thing for you to have. I think it provides a historical record keeping. So again, you may not want to keep this in your account forever. You probably shouldn't keep it in your account forever. But for something like your bounces, where you are going to be asked a question, did this person get this email that we, said that we sent a month ago? If you're a smaller organization, smaller team, you may not be able to go to your BI team and say, hey, did this email go? If you don't have the Marketing Cloud connector, that activity may not be logged in your CRM, so you can't access it there. So you'll have to query the data view. And in that case, you got to go, look, when did I send this job? Let's go narrow it down. Let's pull the day. Let's see, sends to the subscriber. There are different ways to get at that information, but you got to spend a lot of time kind of thinking about it, developing your query, and then either going into Query Studio or into the data views to build a query to kind of identify whether that email flew to that subscriber or not. By keeping a data extension that kind of backs up a certain time period of your bounces, you can go in there, you can just do an ad hoc filter and just say, show me all of the bounces for this subscriber, and boom, there you go. They're right there, quick filter activity, and you can kind of surface that insight. And I mentioned filtering because if we create a data extension to kind of log this data view activity, what we'll do is we'll set up an automation to maybe grab all of the activities that happened within this data view yesterday and append them to a data extension. You can use a primary key and be able to filter those. So on the next slide, I'll kind of go into what I have found useful for my use cases, but really all you're doing is just kind of grabbing the prior 24 hours and then adding them to a data extension with retention for whatever makes sense for your account. And again, the speed to troubleshooting, I feel, is the big value here. Again, you got to keep performance in mind. This isn't something where you want to keep every single email you've ever sent, within a data extension in Marketing Cloud. So you do want to think about size, performance, and even privacy concerns, just in terms of having all that information in your account kind of over time. You certainly don't want to keep that stuff in there forever. But by being able to expose that in a data extension, you can kind of get to troubleshooting things much faster without having to rely on maybe other resources, other teams to answer questions about what happened in Marketing Cloud at a prior date. So this slide is things that I have found useful. So in the data extension column there, you've got the naming convention for the data extension view. I like to put a INT prefix on my data extensions just to denote that this is an internal data extension. It's not something that I'm going to be sending to. It's not something used for testing. It's not something used in a journey. I've just got INT just to denote that that's internal. That's just my personal naming convention. I use the name of the data view in there just so I know what's going on, and then I append historical, and that's just going to tell me that this is kind of looking backwards. I've got the data view that each of my data extensions kind of lines up to, and then just an overview of what I'm trying to achieve with the data in there. So the different data views for your jobs, for example, is going to contain job data. Sent is going to contain subscribers who've been sent emails, and so on down the line. I put some notes in there. You want to be mindful of your time zone. So Marketing Cloud is going to be storing things at Central Standard Time. That can be tricky if you're working across time zones. Maybe you've got daylight savings time, maybe you don't. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind as you're building your query and kind of thinking about what time of day do I want to run this? How am I going to identify things? Am I looking at things that are today minus 1 day, or am I looking at the prior rolling 24 hours? That can all kind of be affected to the records that you're going to sweep when these kind of daylight savings times, events occur. It can shift your records. So just be mindful when you set this up that you're really deliberate about what records you're pulling and what that time frame is. And then that retention notes as well. I logged, that 6 months retention that Salesforce recommends. Again, I haven't seen that necessarily in practice for some of the smaller ones, but just be aware of that if you're going to go backwards and kind of set this up, you're only going to have for those larger data extensions the prior 6 months of data. So just be aware of that if you're just going to get started with this today. And then down below, I've got useful filtered DEs for ad hoc troubleshooting. So these are the ones that I kind of, duplicate and then make searchable. So I've got filtered there to denote that it's a filtered data extension. And then I've got ad hoc because that's how I use it. I just use it for those one-off requests where you get a question and it's just faster for you as the Marketing Cloud specialist or Marketing Cloud admin to get in there and kind of get this answer. I like to be able to filter on a couple different things. Maybe I can, use subscriber key to figure out who the person we're talking about is. You got to be careful with that just in case you've got duplicate records in your account. So just to be thinking about that as you're trying to identify your edge case here. Send date, hopefully your person can give you kind of a frame of when this event was supposed to have occurred. And then your job ID, if you can grab that out of your jobs data view, that will obviously, kind of isolate your records to a single send. And that can be super helpful. And in the notes section there, I've got, what will this data extension kind of tell you? What can you get out of it? For our sends, we can see, was the send attempted? Not necessarily was it delivered, but was this person, in that job, were they able to have an email sent to them? Even if it, may not have been opened, may not have been clicked, may have bounced. But that can be important just to understand, yes, we've attempted to deliver this message. Opens, so we've got, was the send opened? That can be really helpful for some engagement metrics. Maybe someone is, claiming that they received the transactional email, but that they never received it, right? If you've got that open data, you can kind of point to that and say, hey, we did send this message and it looks like you should have, been aware of it given that you opened it. That being said, with the mail privacy protection and other things going on the client side, open data is not 100% reliable. So you do want to be careful and kind of have that conversation with your business stakeholders that just because that tracking pixel did fire doesn't necessarily mean that the human on the other end actually read that message. So helpful for sure, but just kind of have that context when you're having conversations. For your bounces, you definitely filter on your event date. That way you can know what is bouncing and when it is bouncing. This will be super helpful when we talk about our bounces yesterday data extension a little bit later. And then unsubscribes, I find that super helpful for complaint investigations. When you get someone who says, you keep sending me emails, I've asked you to stop sending me emails. You can kind of look and see when was that, unsubscribe logged and figure out if you're actually sending emails. Maybe they're transactional, maybe they've opted back in, or maybe you've got a gap in your unsubscribe handling process and you got to kind of dig into that a little bit further. So definitely helpful for kind of troubleshooting those particular use cases. All right, so send log logging. So you can see I have a cute little squirrel here with all of our different logs. So the send log is a data extension that you can set up in your account. It's going to be storing information about the send at send time. And I find this critical for troubleshooting. So your data views are going to have information about your subscriber. They'll have information about the sends. those are kind of appended into your data view, and you can look at those after the send has occurred to see, what information about the send was captured. The send log, however, is a little bit different. So you do have to set it up. There are templates out there. I've got a link to some resources about setting up a send log. But in addition to storing information about the send and some standard fields, you can store custom fields in addition to what's out of the box. So if you want to store, for example, the sender name, sender email address, we'll go over some more fields in just a second. But you can append those into your send log using AmpScript within the email template. And I have found this to be crucial. And I'll go over some use cases of exactly where it's really kind of bailed me out. But because it's at send time, that's a good value and that it's what was used within the context of the send. You can help log error messages, for example, for sends that didn't go. You can store that error message within the send log. Because that send didn't actually deploy, you're not necessarily going to have that information make it to your data views. So it just provides, again, one more kind of layer of control over what's going in your account, and it kind of exposes that information to allow you to see exactly what's happening. There are row-based retention settings within these send logs. I believe the best practice is 10 days. I find that great. I know sometimes when I'm, in an account, I get a question, and of course, it's from something that should have happened or did happen over a month ago. So I like to, again, kind of have this historical data extension where I will build an automation, grab my send log activities from the day prior, and append them into a record-keeping data extension. And that lets me keep rolling information for a little bit longer. Again, depending on the volume in your account, this may, become problematic from a storage standpoint, from a performance standpoint. So you should really think about, what are your volumes? What makes sense for you to keep in your account versus, using an extract or an export activity to get that into either a data lake or to your BI team for them to be able to kind of store it offsite and let them kind of determine, what's that long-term storage look like. For why should we log? So I mentioned about those surfaces and data points not captured in your sent data view. It also provides that ad hoc analysis at your fingertips. So because it's filterable, because it's a smaller data set, you can kind of get in there and get to records a little bit quicker. You're not wading through as large a pool as a 6-month view back to your sent data view. And then for edge cases, so I mentioned that this is great because you can capture information at send time. One thing I love is that it actually will capture the email address that the send is deployed to. So if you're looking at your data views, a lot of that is going to be subscriber level context, and your subscriber will have an email address associated with them. But when you send an email, you don't always send to the email address associated with the subscriber. Maybe they have provided you a new email address on a form fill because their email has changed. Maybe they're using their professional email address for one send, and they're using their personal email address for another. I know Salesforce Events loves to take my professional email address whenever they can. I like to try to keep everything into my personal email address in the event that I'm going to be changing organizations in the future. I'm concerned about losing access to things. So when you're sending an email, whether it is through a wizard through the single send option, whether it is a journey builder send, you can capture that email address. And that, in my opinion, is critical because it's not exposed in that sent data view. So we'll talk in a couple minutes about how we can join the send log in our data views to expose that, but that will give you the email address that you've actually sent to. And the reason I find that crucial is because when you have sensitive communications and you have somebody that claims that they did or didn't receive something, knowing that email address that you sent to with certainty really helps you have comfort in those conversations. I had a tricky situation working for a financial services organization. We sent password reset notifications. Financial services, security is paramount. So if a user changed their email address, we would send a notification both to the prior email address on file as well as the new email address that was registered, just saying, hey, your email address has been updated per your request. If you didn't make this change, please reach out, notify us, let us know, right? Super critical that that message goes out immediately. Well, we received a call one day from somebody who was not a customer of ours saying, hey, I received this password reset notification. I'm not a customer. And this person was very concerned, rightfully so, about potential fraud. It turns out that the person that we had sent it to, I could see within my send log that yes, I had sent these to emails. I had sent one to the prior email address, one to the new email address. The email that I had sent the prior notification to, the email that it was changed from, was not the person who was reaching out from us that they had received it at. So I knew with confidence that I had sent that email to, ABC at gmail.com, and 123 at gmail.com had received it. But because I knew where I deployed it and I knew I wasn't looking at a subscriber level row, I was looking at my send log row. I knew for certain that I had captured that email address I was deploying to. We were able to kind of push back a bit and say, hey, we know we sent this. Is it possible that your internal corporate email server is forwarding this? Is this maybe the domain lined up? So we were able to say, is it possible that there was an employee of yours who was a customer of ours who was recently terminated and you were their manager? And sure enough, that's what was going on. They had some internal forwarding happening. And the send log was how we were able to identify that that's likely what the situation is. We could say with confidence, this wasn't at our end. We knew who we sent to. Whereas if I was looking at the data views, I knew that it went to that subscriber, but I wouldn't necessarily have that email address available to me without additional digging. So the send log allowed us to identify that kind of funky edge case quickly and confidently, really let us have a much more comfortable conversation. So for different kinds of custom logging, so I mentioned that you've got different strings available to you out of the box, but you can add your own. I've had some accounts where we've done custom 1, custom 2, custom 3, and we've kind of set those with our own campaign tracking metrics. That can be helpful, certainly for tracking later on. But you kind of got to keep in mind that those are reusable. What's custom 1 in one send may not be custom 1 in another send. So these are data points that I think are useful for most audiences. Email address for one, I think I just covered why I find that so important. But your send from name. So, is sender name helpful for troubleshooting? Not really. You know that it was a dynamic send, and that can be what's captured in the data view. But having that fully resolved data string to know that that came from mac.brule at trailblazer.com is really helpful when you're kind of troubleshooting to figure out, how maybe a user says, I never got this email. Well, it did come from us, but it didn't come from our corporate address. It came from your sales representative. That'll allow your user to kind of search quickly to find that old email in their inbox. Sent from email address, same thing. Just really know what that email address value was that you used. Your reply to name, your reply to email address. I find the reply to email address invaluable for dynamic sender profiles. So if you're trying to figure out, what sender profile you use, that information, I believe, is captured within send tracking, but is not to necessarily be resolved. So you see that at send time when you configure a single send, but you don't necessarily have a good way to go back and look at it. So by logging that actual name and email address in your send log, you can know exactly who sent that email, who it was sent from, and what values you were using there when you're talking to your customers or troubleshooting things. And I mentioned earlier with the custom values, I personally find it helpful. We're an audience, a campaign. Maybe you've got some large groups that you can split into subsegments for your audience. Maybe in a financial services context, you've got a wealth program, you've got an educational program, things like that. It can kind of give you, big slices of your data, similar to what you're using in your UTMs, most likely, but at that kind of send log level. So you can kind of tie this back in with your data views and see, are our wealth emails bouncing, for example, at a higher rate than our newsletters, things of that nature. Bounces yesterday. So I find this particular data view to be awesome. So what I'll do is I will set up an automation. It will store it will query the data view for our bounce data view. It's going to grab all of our bounce events from the prior day. I'm going to join it with my send log to get those addresses. I think the bounce data view offhand will have the domain, for example, which can be helpful, but I like to have that email address as well, just to try to see, okay, maybe I've got a bad subscriber, maybe I've got a typo in my email address, whatever it might be. I'm going to grab all of those, join them with my send log for the prior day, and then I'm going to store it in a data extension. And the reason I do that is that it allows me to easily identify domain level issues very quickly. So if you notice that a send has a spike in a bounce rate, what you can do is check this data extension, you run it overnight, it's already waiting for you. You can log in the morning. You can take a quick peek, 30 seconds or less. Hopefully you only have a couple records in there, right? And they're either typos, maybe you've got a bad address. You're able to kind of see, okay, I've got one or two. I need to take care of these from a deliverability concern, but nothing major is going on. And then one day you'll log in and you will have 200 records, and you've got a small volume of sends. So that's a huge red flag immediately, like what happened? And what you can see is that you may have had a domain level change, especially in a B2B context. Maybe an organization changed their domain. Maybe their company name has changed. They've gone through a rebrand and then they've changed that. And if they don't set it up to forward those emails or to properly relay those, you can have an issue, especially if they haven't told you that those domain is changing. They asked me how I know, right? This happened to me personally at a prior organization. So by seeing that, you can kind of very quickly get on the phone, talk to your contacts over at that organization and say, hey, did y'all change your domain? And then kind of, resolve your contacts from there en masse instead of having to, go through and hurt your deliverability by continuing to send messages and bouncing to those. So it's a really easy way to kind of surface those big smoke issues that may get lost, within an 80,000 record newsletter sent, you may not notice those 200, but when you look at it the next day and you see that all 200 or the vast majority of them have the same domain, great. You got a problem. You've identified it right away. And more often than not, you don't need it, right? You look and you got a couple records and you clean them up and you can go about your day. But it's very helpful to kind of just have that waiting for you in the morning. So other things you can do with this is kind of dress it up. So a verification activity. So I mentioned, because this is an automation studio, you can run a verification activity to kind of count those. And if you've got a high watermark that is going to be a problem, you can push them up from there. Looks like my daughter's going to say hello. Nice. Come on here, come here. We're getting to talk right now. So the verification activity can let you say, hey, we've got more records than 10, right? If you're a low sender volume, maybe that's one. If you are a high sender volume, this probably isn't going to work with you. And you got to think about maybe doing another query to kind of identify the records there, figure out how many you've got, and figure out how to identify that. Maybe send an automated email if you've got more than a certain percent of your sends from the prior day, something like that. Other than that, you can also create an email activity, like I mentioned, with group domains. So it's definitely more advanced from the SQL side. But if you can take your bounces, group them by domains, and maybe just provide yourself an automated email to your administrators, maybe with a table in it, group those results by domain, you can see, do you have a problem with a particular domain? All right, so automation squared. So this is an automation about your automations. Marketing Cloud, I think a little bit over a year ago at this point, maybe longer, released the automation instance data views. So this is going to store information about an instance of your automation runs. The official documentation is great, in my opinion, on this case. They've got some use cases built right in there about what you care about, things that you can do to kind of help you in your daily maintenance of your account. And they've also got sample code out there as well. So definitely check that out. It's I think a lot of the stuff that they're providing right out of the box is the stuff that you'll probably care about right away. Then again, you can pair it with those verification or email activities. Hopefully anybody here who is already using Automation Studio is using those error or skipped run notifications, maybe run completion notifications. I think where those can sometimes fail, or I shouldn't say fail, where they can let you down is if you go in there and you pause an automation to kind of work on a query that's in line or something like that, and then you forget to restart it. So what this automations data view does is it can show you all of the automations that did run to completion yesterday, or maybe it will show you all of the automations that failed yesterday. So even if you are sending those email notifications, I think many people have run into the issue where they kind of just become noise sometimes. You get a run completion notification every hour, every day, forever. That error message might slip through. You see it. Yep, 804 came through. Great. Kind of ignore it. You don't read, oh, that's an error. I got to think about that. So when I see dataviews.io is in the chat, I mentioned earlier, that is a huge resource. So definitely a good one out there. Some challenges with the automation instance data view. It can be in UTC's time, not system time. So again, it's just one of those things, not necessarily a problem. You just have to be aware of it as you're trying to kind of link things up across your use cases. And then you can also have a row for each notification recipient. So if you've got an automation set up to trigger a completion email to 3, 4, 5 members on your team, you'll have duplicate rows. So you just want to think about that as you're kind of identifying, do I really have 5 completions? No, you've got 5 rows for 5 recipients for 1 completion. And yes, Orlando, I believe it does log if an automation runs successfully. So again, the official documentation kind of has a little bit more detail on the specifics of what it can and can't do. And I think I've got some resources at the end. I think Gregory Gifford, I believe, has some really cool information about this from when it was new. So I think he kind of did a great job of diving in and not only, kind of exploring those official use cases, but also some of the edge cases. So it has changed a little bit since it's been released. So some of that information I think has been updated. But I've got a link to that on my resources slide at the end here to kind of go both the official documentation and then some of what the community has explored out there. But yeah, I think it can be helpful. You can even get what is the runtime, for example, of your completed automations. So yes, the automation completed, but it took 10 minutes yesterday and instead of the 3 minutes, it takes on average. And if that continues over time, maybe that's a red flag. Maybe you need to go look and, something changed in your data or something changed in your query that's causing it to not be as performant. So 5 tips. I think we like to kind of, always wrap this up just to kind of distill some of the things that we talked about. So 5 tips for thinking about working with Automation Studio with these automations in particular. Determine your timing and storage needs up front. I think when you talk about backing up data views, I think it can make some people nervous because it can very quickly become a large size data extension. It can affect your performance. So you need to think about for your organization and your sending patterns, what makes sense to store. You may not want to store more than 6 months. You may not even want to store 6 months. That may be way overkill for your use case. Hopefully, if that's the case, you've got some other resources where you can use a tracking extract, for example, to a data lake, and you've got a team that you can get those kind of requests handled to. But for smaller accounts, when somebody asks you, hey, did this email go 3 months ago? I've got a complaint. Those exposing those data views historically and being able to filter those right within the UI can be really helpful for getting, a quick answer to your stakeholders who need it. When you're doing those kind of investigations, that analysis, keep your subscriber key versus your recipient address in mind. Again, we're not always sending to the email address associated with a subscriber in the all subscribers table. So think about that and just make sure you keep in mind that when I'm looking at all emails going to this recipient, which email address am I asking about and how am I getting that information? Am I getting it from my data view? Am I getting it from my send log, or am I storing that historically somewhere? Verification activities make great smoke alarms. I think I'm a big fan of adding these wherever I can in my automations to say, hey, I've got more records than expected, less records than expected. You will have false alarms. I think that happens. And I think it's so nice that you can go into your automation, look at it and say, oh, I did have more records than expected. We had a great day yesterday. Awesome. We sold an extra 50 units, an extra 50 emails were triggered than we've ever done before. Best day ever. Let's kick that automation off and send it. Because the flip side is when you accidentally, somebody changes a product type, for example, and you've got 1,000 onboarding emails going to people who are already customers. They just had an internal product data point change. You can kill that. You could say, whoa, we did not have 1,000 new members sign up yesterday. We made a data change on our side and didn't think about that criteria. So that can really be helpful for you and just kind of making sure that you know when things are going, when they should, when you've got problems, and when you might, but you really don't. Monitoring bounces, I think that's something that the community has been really, focused on. Deliverability is huge. Consent is huge. Making sure that you are sending messages to people who want them and who are capable of receiving them, is a big thing right now. So we want to make sure that we are preventing deliverability problems before they get large enough that you're going to get noticed by the ISPs. So think about that. Look at your bounces, make sure that you're resolving them. And then an automation square. So it could be a great second line of defense to your email notifications. Having that email in my inbox, when I'm developing something to tell me that a automation ran, love it. I turn it off after a couple weeks of successful runs? I do. I leave the error notifications in place, but that doesn't help you when you turn something off and human error kind of gets involved. So just having an automation to tell you, hey, what ran yesterday, what failed yesterday, it is a great kind of second notification just to help you understand, what's going on in your account and, what's going well and what may not be, what can we work on a little bit more. All right, so I will finish it off with this resources slide. So again, feel free to take a screenshot of this. I think most of these are out there, easily Googleable as well. So for data views, definitely, I think data views IO was shared in the chat from someone earlier. Definitely a resource I use. Matus's blog also has great documentation out there about the system level data views, individual data view details, and again, a little bit more of the architecture as well, kind of how those are linked and how you can traverse relationships from one to the next. And then the official documentation as well. They've got some SQL query examples out there that I find helpful. How do I find all sends from a particular journey for the prior day, for example? Those can be really helpful and you can tweak them pretty easily. So I definitely recommend checking out the official documentation there, using that SQL in your account and just, again, just kind of make adjustments to fit your needs in particular. Send logging, I lean on Matus again. I think get just great information out there about getting a send log set up. If it's not something you have in your account, definitely recommend looking into it and kind of getting that configured. I think that send time context is huge, and the ability to log your own custom values is super valuable. I think it's definitely one of the top 5 features, in my opinion, within Marketing Cloud. Not necessarily flashy, but it's just so valuable. And then automation instance goodies. So I think I mentioned, name dropped Greg Gifford earlier. His blog, Gortonington, is out there. So Orlando, definitely check that out if you're interested in potentially doing, an automation on automations. That blog I think it was written up, when it was first released. So I think some of that information may have changed a little bit as Marketing Cloud has kind of enhanced it over the past year plus. But really went into a deep dive and give some great use cases. And then again, the official documentation for the automation data views, that automation instance data views, has some SQL query examples out there that can get you going immediately with things that failed prior day, things that completed prior day, and things of that nature. So definitely check it out. That is all I was hoping to cover today. So I will go to my thank you slide just to say thank you for everybody for joining. And then I will jump back to resources just so people need that, you can grab it. And if you have any questions, I'd love to open it up. Happy to chat. You are very welcome, Tim and Zita and everybody else. I really appreciate it. If there's nothing else, I guess we can wrap a little early, but thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And don't hesitate to reach out. And I think I mentioned we've got some other upcoming events, both in this user group and Boston Marketers. So please feel free to check out our future sessions. So really appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great end of your week.